Yoko is coming.
Okay. Hey, everybody. And in the name of the International Federation of Public History Explorers, welcome. I'm Hamish McLean, your host for today. The event today is Between the West and East, Public History in Japan. We're joined by a range of speakers that we are super lucky to have. And thank you so much, guys, in advance for all the work you've put in for today's event. We really appreciate it. First, I'd like to introduce our speakers and Thomas, and then Emmy and Shu Young will give a quick introduction to themselves and the event. I'd also like to apologize in advance for my pronunciations, which will be just as embarrassing for me as they are for you, I'm sure. Jun Ogawa is a PhD student of literature at the University of Tokyo and a project researcher at the Center for Open Data in the Humanities. In addition to research on Roman provincial studies, he is engaging in several research projects in the field of digital humanities and digital history. He focuses on the application of linked open data and knowledge graph to historical studies, aiming to present the historical knowledge as machine-readable digital data. Recently, he has also been interested in 3D representations of historical data, seeking a new way of analyzing and describing history in a multidimensional research environment. Takuya Takuhara is a master's student of history at the University of Tokyo and a teacher at the Yokohama Kokusai Senior High School. His research interest is the ways in which people use and consume history or fiction in their everyday lives and the relationship between that practice and constructing their historical consciousness. Yoko Yamaguchi is a PhD student and graduate at the Humanities and Sociology School of the University of Tokyo. Yoko studies the possibilities of historiographies not only written in words, but also drawn by graphical expression, and addresses the following questions in her research. How can we translate the knowledge of social science, including history, into the graphical form? And especially in the case of historiographies, is it possible to draw on the past which we do not have direct access? In this regard, Yoko is especially interested in the works of Bondet Descend, who in the recent movement of French historians who have begun to pay attention to this graphic media. Thomas Calvin is one of our moderators for today and is the head of the Department of Public History at the University of Luxembourg Center for Contemporary and Digital History, which he joined in 2020 in the framework of his own MIOA FNR Attract Fellowship. Thomas was also president of the International Federation for Public History from 2018 till 2021. And in May of 2022, Thomas launched the second edition of his book, Public History, a Textbook of Practice. The book explores opportunities and challenges encountered by public history practitioners in the field. And 6 years after the first edition, the renewed attention is given to the increasingly international dimension of public history, its fast-changing digital practices, and the renewed debates on what it means to work for, on, and with public history. Thomas is also the Explorers guest for January 2023, when he will talk about the aforementioned book, and I expect you all to be there. I will now pass the floor to Emmy and Shu Young, and thanks so much, guys.
Hi, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. And I also thank you very much, IFPH Explorers team, Himena and Hamish, for all your support. My name is Emmy Tozawa, a second-year PhD student at the University of Manchester, particularly interested in how and to what extent popular culture has kind of influenced contemporary global perspectives on Japanese history. Shuyan and I will be the moderators today, so Shuyan, can you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, my name is Shuyan Song. I am a PhD student at the Free University of Berlin. My research is about German history in the Cold War, especially from transnational perspectives and the perspectives of public history. I engage in several public history projects, both in Germany and China, where I originally come from. And I am also in the team of the IFPH Students and Early Career Group.
Great, thank you, Shuyan. So she will mainly be handling Q&A session and discussion later. Well, let me briefly explain today's schedule. So Takuya and Yoko will be talking about the representations of history in graphic media. So Japanese educational manga, comics, and French Bondeshne, I don't know if I'm pronouncing correctly, but to consider public history between the West and the East, as the event title says. And Jun will be focusing on digital public history in Japan, discussing how digital changes the way of our interactions with historical knowledge. Very exciting topics. Each of them will talk for around 15 or 20 minutes. Following the presentations, we'd like to ask for some comments from our very special commentator today, Professor Thomas Koppan. Thank you very much for taking your time for this on Saturday morning. We all really appreciate it. So we will take time to do Q&A session after the presentations and the comments from Thomas, but please feel free to leave your comments or questions in the chat. Okay, so let's get this started. So if Yoko and Taka, are you ready to present yours?
Okay.
Okay, you can start sharing your screen.
Wait a second. Can you see the slide, my slide now?
Yes, great.
Okay. So thank you for inviting me today. And I'm Yoko Yamaguchi, a PhD student, and I'm primarily study about the French modern history. But I'm also interested in the public history and especially the recent movements of bande dessinée in France. So that is what I'd like to talk about today. And the reason I got interested in the French bande dessinée is not so complicated one, because I've been studying about French history for years. I had many chance to come across the French comics, the bande dessinée, especially the works treating the French history. But at the beginning, subconsciously, I was thinking that I was just reading bande dessinée for the supplement for the academic research, and I treat it as just like hobby things. But one day a question come up to my mind, like this. So why do I always excluded bande dessinée, manga, or comics or similar media from the academic historiography? And when I say the academic or scientific works of history, I always imagine the article or books which almost consists of the written word. And we always say writing history, but not drawing history. But why? And it seems that we always tend to privilege the written words in more legitimized and authentic form of the historiography and other social scientific writing. And but I think it is not always the case. And as you know, some historian pointed the limit of the verbal form already. For example, the Frank Anker Schmidt underlined in his book the existence of the moments of the historical experience, which consists of the mixture of the image and the sound and the smell and cannot be described in the words. And also the Rosenstone severely criticized the precedent historiography and claimed the importance of the movie or form of the and in the movie as a form of the perception and understanding of the people's understanding of the history. And in other social science discipline, there are some movements who try to rehabilitate the role of the drawing for the analysis. And so, for example, there are critics among the discipline of the anthropologists. For example, some anthropologists like Manuel José Romao or Tim Angold pointed that for example, from 19th century, the anthropologists began to subestimate the role of the drawing as a form of the research, but they claim that it is necessary to rehabilitate it because the drawing is also the important tool for analyzing and understanding for their research and the tool of the communication. And in fact, in this vein, some recent anthropologists began to use the drawing and the graphical form of the graphical images as the way of the expression and their research. And we can see in the several ethnography published from the University of Toronto, which using the comic as a way of depicting the ethnography. And also in the medical discipline, now some researchers and doctors invest in the potential of the comic form for the tool of the healthcare and communication. For example, this book, I cited the image in this slide, which titled Graphic Medical Manifesto, claimed that the drawing medical experiences enable us to get more multi-perspective and inclusive point of view between patient and the doctor and other actors in the medical domain. So there are some movements like this to try to invest in the potential of the drawing as a tool of the social science. But it is the case of the other discipline, not the history. And so is it possible also in the historian? I must admit this is a very difficult question, because in the historiography, we have to describe the past, the distant past to which we don't have directed access. And also in the historiography, we also have to elucidate the debates of the former researchers and show the long history of the debate. And to tackle this difficult problem, I like to show recent cases of French bande dessinée. And the bande dessinée, its definition is very difficult to set because there are many similar media with different names like manga or comics or graphical novels. And actually, the French, the word bande dessinée began to prevail in the French media during the 1960s, and it was differentiated from the American comic or Japanese manga. And in the French market, the designation coexisted, but its definition is rarely so ambiguous one, and we often see the French historian use the word bande dessinée as describing almost all the similar media, including manga or comics. So, and today I can't explore the and compare the cultural difference of the manga and bande dessinée and the graphic novel or comics. So I'd like to set the definition for this occasion, and I won't call the bande dessinée as the name used by Francophone to indicate the works where one can express the story and the time sequence by positing the image and the word arbitrarily. And at least on the level of the technique of expression or narration, bande dessinée is equivalent to the other similar media like comics and manga and graphic novel. And to the bande dessinée, French historian got interested in this around, especially around 1917s, and it was under the influence of the other discipline like the literary criticism and semiology. And at this time, the certain historian analyzed the bande dessinée as a primary source of the certain age. For example, the bande dessinée as a testimony of the atmosphere of the wartime. And also some researchers try to write the history of the media itself. So at the time, the historian pay attention to the bande dessinée as the primary sources, but this movement began to change around the 1990s. And at this time, some historians treat the bande dessinée as a narrative of the past and the memories. So they started to treat the bande dessinée as another type of the historiography. And in fact, there are some around this for the last 10 years, the historian publicly appreciate the bande dessinée as a form of the historiography. For example, the annual prize judged by some historian and also the bande dessinée, and there the exposition in the departmental archive, which the specialists juxtapose the document and the archival document and the particular work of the bande dessinée. And this movement has a particular context. For example, there are general shift among the French historian. I mean, we can see the arrival of the younger generation who is used to this kind of the media, and also around the 18th and the 19th, we can point to the apparition of the experimental work like the Art Spiegelman's Mouse, and this experimental work provoked the development of the memory studies, which treat the bande dessinée as a subject of their analysis. And also, there are the very important factor, and because also the French historian are recently very have anxiety of the recent the public movement, which I mean they have to be faced with the prevail of the distorted history in public media, and so they are also try to increase their presence in the public audiences. So in this context, they see the potential of a bande dessinée as a narrative of the history, another way to communicate with the public audiences. But in fact, and they are very ambitious work, bande dessinée, which merits more attention. and some historians began to take part of the creation of bande dessinée itself, and not as just advisor, but also as the author of the work itself. And so in these works, we can find some hint of the difficult question, which I mean how to describe the history, not only by words, but also by drawing, like bande dessinée, and how do they manipulate the bande dessinée as a historiography. And one example of the bande dessinée who depict history is the case of the bande dessinée as a reportage, the documentary like the bande dessinée like documentary film. And for example, I cite the work of the Etienne Daboudou, who is the master of that kind of the bande dessinée. And in this form, we easily show the process of the investigation and of the historian and investigators. And there are also another kind of the reportage work like this, not using the drawing, but using the photographies. And if we, as you remember, the manifesto of the Ivan Jablonka, who claimed the conscious use of I by historians, this type of the bande dessinée, like reportage, is very effective way of showing the subjectivity of the historian who do the investigation, and also very effective for telling the micro history, because we can show all the process of the research. And in another cases, there in this work, there we can see the very ambitious effort to use the primary document. And I cite the work untitled The Jacket, which featured the Dreyfus Affair, and which is a very important political scandal in the French history. And in this work consists of almost the citation of the citation of the contemporaries' article and books and testimony, and also cites their words literary and situating them in anachronical form. For example, they also depicted the phrase of the famous journalist at the time in a guise of the timeline of Twitter, in order to compare the atmosphere at the time with the information chaos of today's people. And also the reader can access the primary sources directly by scanning each page with the publisher's app. And so if we scan each page, the site of the French National Library's database automatically open, and we can see the article cited in the page you scanned. And also there is the case of the collaborational work of the historian and the author of the bande dessinée. And here is a case of the series published in the famous bande dessinée publisher in France. And in this work, and the historian tried to depict the uncertainty and debate of each time. And for example, in this first volume, the author, in this volume, we accompany the unreal journey of the of the great figure of the French history, the drive of the Michelet, the 19th century French historian, and Jeanne d'Arc, and Alexandre Dumas, and Molière, and Marie Curie, and Marshall Pétain. And in this unreal situation, they also tried to pose the question against the national history of France and relativize the great figure of the French history. And in another volume, they also invite the three persons at the different age, the 19th century historian and the history of the Annales school and the famous novelist, and show the different image around the history of the age of the absolutism. And in this, and so they're using the anachronic drawing to try to juxtapose the several debate of the history. And also in this series, they also use deliberately the distortion of the image. For example, in this case, they also depicted the image of the Gaul people at the pagan time, and as a form of the Hulk, which is a famous character of the American comics, and it's really unreal depiction. But by using this character, they also try to show the insanity, uncertainty of the appearance of the people about that time, because we don't have any direct researches of the appearance of the people at that time. So they insert this unreal image to try to show how we can not to get directed access to that time. And sorry that there is very unconstructed explanation, but in this presentation, I want to question against the primacy of written words, which always construct the scientific and authentic historiography. And I want to also show the possibility of the re-estimation of the drawing in the social science, including the history and the historiography. And for these cases, I also like to introduce the recent reapproachment of French historian toward bande dessinée, and it is context. And I also showed the example of the recent works. And as a conclusion, I'd like to claim that there are very many possibility and potential of the historiography if we use the graphical image as drawing as a strategy to create the new form of the historiography. Sorry, it is okay to time and the importance. Sorry, and I don't claim that all the historians have to use the drawing as a tool of historiography, but maybe it is important to be conscious about why we always legitimize the written word as a tool of writing the historiography. But there are so many problems to explore for my proposal, because I try to estimate the drawing as a tool of the communication, but maybe the primacy of the visual image is also not neutral one. It depends on the context of the modern world, and Also, when we try to draw the history, we have to construct more detailed methodology of how to use the image or drawing for tell the past and depict the past. And also we have to compare with the other form of the media, like novel and film with the drawing. And in my presentation, there are many lack of the problem of the audiences. And also in my proposal, I couldn't explore the problem of the role of the author and the publisher and the industrial context of the bande dessinée or manga or comics. And I couldn't compare between the manga, bande dessinée, and the comic like the other similar media, but there are so many problems because, for example, the audiences between the bande dessinée and the manga is very different because the form of the publishing is very different from between the bande dessinée and manga. So when we pay attention to the possibility of this form of the historiography, we also have to compare the cultural context of the each media, but unfortunately, this problem is beyond my capacity today. So I want to put this question for the all of the you, and also I hope this problem should be should be cased by the presentation of the Tokuhara-san. And sorry, it's very not unsophisticated the presentation, but here is my proposal today.
Okay, thank you, Yoko-san, and so very awesome presentation. So it's my turn. Okay, and I share my screen. So please off your. Okay, thank you. And can you see my slides? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so thank you for introducing, and thank you, Yoko-san. So awesome presentation. So my name is Takuya. Please call me Tak. My name is Takuya Tokuhara. I'm a student of history and media studies in the master's degree of the University of Tokyo. At the same time, I work as a history and IB history teacher at Yokohama Senior High School for International Studies. Unfortunately, I'm not good at English, so maybe I use some Japanese in my presentation, but I try to try. Okay. So I'm interested in a practical past and doing or practicing the history of ordinary people. And also I'm interested in how the relationship and distance between doing and practicing history of the practical past and the academic historiography creates our identity in the classroom, as suggested by Peter Seixas. As a practicing and doing history in everyday life, I'm now focusing on Japanese popular culture, including video games, animations, or manga comics. In my previous studies, these popular comics commodities are analyzed by their representations, and my focus is on the practice of the actors who produce, circulate, and consume them. From the perspective of this practice rather than the representations, I believe the three aspects of public history can be reconsidered. First is the relationship between the national history and the public history. Second, who is the public in the public history? And third, how does popular history pose for the public history? Beginning, we review some types of analyzing comics from the perspective of public history, including Japan. Previous studies have focused on the possibility of comics, foundational comic strips, and manga being examined as historical accounts. A study by Keith Livens, published in the Oxford Handbook of Public History 2017, focused on historical comics as a public history. Livens argues the paradigm shift of comic representation from cheap, heroic romanticism to the educational framework is worth considering as public history in the 1970s. Even Jablonka 2014 also distinguishes between two types of historical comics, referring to the French foundational. In his opinion, there is a vivid difference between exotic historical comics and historical comics that give a proper understanding of the past. At the same time, in Japan, Hiro Matsubara, a professor at Rikkyo University and a scholar of American history, wrote a short essay paper in 2017 entitled "Everybody Does History, Even If They Play Games and Animes." In his narrative, he focused on historical games, comics, and animes, distinguishing between the stereotypical form of representation and stereotype. In his narrative, he focused on his historical games, comics, animes, and distinguished between the stereotypical forms of representation and creative forms of representations. All these studies on historical comics focused on the representation and show that certain types of historical comics can be historically true or historically accurate enough to be considered in the field of historiography. However, these previous studies simultaneously face some problems. First, how can we determine that some historical accounts are good and others are bad when we consider certain types of historical comics to be of cheap or insufficient quality of public history? Secondly, the authority of academic historian is preserved and not shared in any way when we as a historian, we judge the authenticity of popular historical representations. And third, public history seems to think it's important to know how ordinary people think about history. Then, who are the ordinary people in the public history? So who are ordinary people in the public history? Previous research has tended to focus on ordinary people who are relatively kind to history. However, ordinary people are not always kind to history, especially academic history as authority. They may ignore, complimentary use, or even dislike our historians as authority and our historiography as historians. But they are also ordinary people and do history through the production, sale, purchase, and enjoyment of historical products. In other words, there is already a spread of popular products based on history, from what we consider good public history. That does not mean that bad or cheap public history is spreading. In fact, what is spreading now is something between these two dimensions, good and bad. Today, I will look at the practice of authors, editors, and consumers of historical comics and examine how practices in consumer society are felt worthy of consideration as a matter of public history by comparing and contrasting two Japanese comics. 逃げ上手の若君 in English, maybe Elusive Samurai, and the series of Kadokawa educational manga. The elusive samurai is recently one of the most popular examples of historical manga, run in a Shukan Shonen Jump, the Japanese most famous and popular comic magazine. The author, Matsui Yusei's previous work, Assassination Classroom, was a huge hit on a level rarely seen in Japanese manga history. In Leben's words, it is the epitome of popular and cheap heroic public history. The hero of this work is Hojo Tokiyuki. No one will be unfamiliar with him. He is a descendant of Hojo Tokimune. You may know Tokimune from hit games as Civilization, but Tokiyuki is not so well known even in Japan. Matsui portrays Tokiyuki as an anti-hero, a mirror image of Ashikaga Takauji, a hero in national history who defeated the Hojo dynasty and established the Muromachi shogunate. He reversed the normal heroic narrative as a winner, Takauji Ashikaga, and the loser, Matsui, loser Tokiyuki Hojo. Matsui reverses Tokiyuki as a loser, but his rhetoric does not deviate from the usual heroic romance. And the manga's representations of the character is overly caricatured, exaggerating parts of the historical facts for the sake of entertainment. The Kadokawa educational manga series, on the other hand, appears at first glance to be an example of good public history, as defined by previous studies. Kadokawa, in collaboration with leading Japanese historians, has produced a new series of educational history manga. The series attempts to transcend the limitation of traditional historical comics by making the narratives as represented minorities, women, and children. However, when analyzed from the perspective of doing or practicing history, a bit more complex situation emerges, including the relationship between the public and national history and the issue of historical authority. In what follows, we take up the interview with authors and editors. In doing so, we consider how they practice history and reconsider the historical authority of academic historians. National history and public history are often seen as a contradictory or non-overlapping at first glance. However, the actors producing historical manga in Japan actually regard national history as an essential component of their work. The editors of educational manga recognize that national standards for history education curricula have a strong influence on their products. This is because the consumer of their products regards them as useful for school curriculum and high school or university entrance examinations. Supervising historians also found it difficult to revise the relatively old male-centered political economic view of the history in the national standards of education to a more truthful, gender equal, social and cultural approach on the content level, as the content is necessary for the examinations. In short, in Japan, educational history comics are regarded as comicized variant of historical textbooks. Shared authority, an important aspect of public history, is also problematic in the production of educational manga. Editors sometimes desire historians to have a strict authority and even not to share it, which is evident in the case of Kadokawa. Educational comics are perceived as a variant of history textbooks, which means that Kadokawa comics is also under attack by the revisionist historians. To defend themselves against attacks, Kadokawa editor demands the historians use their authority to defend them. And the national standard of historical education is also a barrier that prevents comics from the revisionist attacks. So in this case, authority does not disappear or dissolve with sharing, but it's used in history wars and negotiations. The case of Elusive Samurai is a little more complex. Both the author and editors of entertainment manga state that their work is relatively free from academic historiography and national history. They do not care what historians say about their product, because historians do not contribute much sales success. Their aim is to entertain their audience and to succeed in sales. So the academic interest in how entertainment comics represent history is not an issue, they say. Interestingly, however, this does not mean that the editors and authors of Elusive Samurai ignore historical accuracy, authority, historical sources, interpretive process, or public historical perspectives. In interviews, editors of Jump Comics reveals that they consider historical fiction to be more akin to fantasy comics, or more detached from reality than fantasy. According to editors, the one lie theory is important in their comic theory. In other words, the more lies and fiction there are, the harder it is to attract audience. The fewer lies there are, the easier it is for audience to enter the world of comics. For example, My Hero Academia, which recently recorded top sales and has been translated into many languages, take this approach. In this comic, personalities are replaced by superpower in real school life. That is one lie, personalities to the superpower. But in this perspective, One Piece accomplishes a very difficult task from these perspectives. The world of One Piece is unrealistic, the characters are unrealistic, the superpowers are unrealistic, and the pirates no longer exist in Japan. Historical fiction is similar to case of One Piece, they say. The values, items, and languages are so far removed from today that most everything is fiction, so it needs a lot of tricks to attract their audiences. Paradoxically, that is why they need historians many historical sources. In the cases of the Elusive Samurai, metaphors are used extensively to give a sense of reality to events and sensations from the distant past. The metaphors are not entirely fictional, but are collected from historical sources, critically examined and interpreted as entertainment. This work is mainly carried out by the author, with a division of labor in which historians provide advice. In the words of editor, we have the endorsement that our interpretation is historically possible. Interesting in this regard is, for example, the following scene. A character in the comic handles a large, unrealistic, large sword. At first, when reading the manga, this seems to be a typical entertainment caricature expression. However, it is later revealed that large sword image was created through some process of interpretation in that age and event, the arrival of Mongol Empire. This is important. The scene depicting the Mongol attacks of Tsushima and Japan deconstructions, the general Japanese history textbook accounts. In general, textbooks often look for students to give a one ethnicity, one history, one nation representation of many countries. But in this scene, in Elusive Samurai touches on the Mongol Empire was a multi-ethnic empire, that its army was also made up of multi-ethnicity. At the same time, the comic mentions that with regard to oddly-shaped sword, because the Mongolian army were made up of multi-ethnic groups, a wide variety of weapons are left behind after the war. That produced a try and error process of technological development during this period. This explanation in this manga is given as follows: the supervising historian's comment page. Description of such weapons appear frequently in medieval literature. especially in the tales about shogun or generals. The reason why that have not survived much in the historical record is thought to be because they are expandable. Since it is true that weapons become increasingly diversified during the period of the Northern and Southern dynasties, we have used medieval literature to fill in the missing gaps, he states. In other words, this scene, which is represented as seemingly caricatured when viewed in terms of practice, the constructs of textbook national history while exploring the applicability of historical sources such as medieval literature, which is difficult to use in positivist historiography. The issue of national and public history and authority of historians over the elusive samurais are, as we have just seen, convergent. Actors themselves, and we, in a primary sense, we see their work as cheap or mutually contradictory to the academic history. However, if we look at their practice, we find that they are engaged in the appropriation of historians' authority, collaboration, the conversion and deconstruction of national histories. The plurality of sites of historical practice discussed above is important when considering manga media in Japan. And this is also true in the field of consumptions. From this point on, which is still a work in progress, so it is necessary to take into account that consumers' historical practice differ from one media or community to another. Different media for the sake for different media for the same work will have different modes of historical communication. For example, since the serialization of Elusive Samurai on Jump Comics magazine began, there has been a surge of references to the work on Twitter, Wikipedia, and online forums. And the historical communication, the mode of historical communication is different each other. The online fan community debates the accuracy and factuality of this work by referring academic articles on Wikipedia examples. In contrast, users who refer to such academic article on online forums are called historical geeks and excluded. People there exclusively communicate by referring to other work of fiction, such as historical comics, other historical comics, historical novels, or films. These fan groups are so different in their modes of communication that they cannot be lumped together as consumer. And it is unclear where the same person uses multiple modes of communication and media convergence. And it is also biased to single out a subset of fan community and refer to them as a normal people, ordinary people. In fact, many readers of historical comics do not use Wikipedia or online forums, and there are some biased and revisionist opinion on online forums actually. Representing these as ordinary people simply subverts rather than rethink the public framework that public history has previously assumed. What is important, however, is that different mangas show differences in how well their products reach diverse consumer communities. In the case of education comics, there's the same historical comics medium is rarely discussed in such a diverse online communities. In the case of educational comics, the audience is mostly historians, educators, and students and their families. Conceivably, this type of reception is more common for historical comics, which are more likely to be subject to public history. In contrast, the case of the entertainment work, Elusive Samurai, the work is mentioned in multiple venues with very different modes of historical communications. It is interesting to note that the work, historical convergence, it is interesting to note that the work itself converges multiple venues and fun communities and brings up about discussion in each of them in their way. It may not necessarily be a good public for historians in academia, but they does not mean that they are in denial about history itself or they are all revisionists. In fact, it is those who live between the good public and bad public who make up the bulk of society. What is the scope of the public history we have been discussing? I would like to conclude my report by posing this question. Thank you. Oh, Amy-san too, muted.
Thank you, sorry. Yeah, thank you very much, Yoko and Takuya, for wonderful presentations. It was fascinating to see the possibilities of graphic novels or comics to depict history in very kind of different contexts, France and Japan. I liked the point raised that these kind of representations of history could be kind of like counter narrative to like national or dominant history. So thank you very much. I think they have many questions to ask, but before that, we have another intriguing presentation. So Jun usually works on digital public history in the West, but he will use Japanese case studies today. So this is going to be really interesting to see his insights into public history between the West and the East. So you ready, Jun?
Yes, I will share my screen.
Thank you.
Can you see my screen, my slides?
Yeah, great.
Sorry, I'm just doing my presentation with this browser screen, so it's not a slideshow, but yeah. Okay, hello everyone. Today I would like to give my thoughts on the issue of public history and digital movement with the title "Doing Public History in Digital Era from the Perspective of Historical Big Data." Actually, although I am not taking public history as my specialized field of study, but today I would like to introduce some digital history projects now going on in Japan and think how those projects somehow connect to the problems of public history. First, we should look at some definitions of digital public history given by previous studies. Although they are only part of many definitions given by the many scholars, we can clearly find that they see the impact of digital to the public history as very fundamental. But why thinking about digital in public history is so important? I think that's because digital has become an indispensable tool for both knowledge creation and communication. This impact must be much larger in public history than in academic historical studies, because the public, which might be regarded as synonymous with contemporary society, is living in a highly digital culture. Doing history in or with the public means, to some extent, doing history with digital technologies. Thus, we need to ask this question very seriously. How does digital change the way of creating and communicating historical knowledge? Oh, sorry, I just forgot to move my slides, but now we are here. So we need to ask this question. I know this question is too broad and difficult to answer in this short presentation. So I want to focus here on just one topic, which is historical big data. The concept of historical big data plays an important role in the time machine projects, which originally began in Europe, and then similar projects started in other regions like Korea and Japan. Historical big data includes large amount of machine-readable data extracted from various sources like text, images, audio, or 3D objects, integrating them together as a huge knowledge base of historical information. Based on this knowledge base, the final goal of historical big data projects is to reconstruct a past environment in a 4D digital space, making it possible to simulate past situations or events there. In this process, cutting-edge digital technologies such as deep learning algorithm or 3D representation methods should be widely applied to compensate for missing or deficient data, making the knowledge base as comprehensive as possible. In Japan, the attempt for constructing such big data has only recently begun. I will show you some reading projects in this movement. Okay, creating machine readable text data is really an essential part of historical big data project. For this, we need to digitally transcribe huge amount of undigitized text. Since it must be impossible to complete this task only by historians or archivists, some projects apply crowdsourcing methods as solution, such as Citizen Archivist in US National Archives and Records Administration NARA, or Transcribathon run by Europeana. The most remarkable project in Japan might be Minna de Honkoku, which aims to transcribe Japanese historical documents, mostly written in kuzushiji letters, with the cooperation of citizens. The biggest problem of transcribed Japanese historical documents is kuzushiji, because most Japanese today cannot even distinguish the letters of it. For this problem, AI kuzushiji OCR was invented by my institution, Center for Open Data in the Humanities, and this helped both scholars and citizens to read and transcribe all documents. Furthermore, as this algorithm is implemented in the mobile application called Mio, people can use it anytime, anywhere. On the other hand, for the modern text, National Library of Japan offers a service called Next Digital Library, which contains OCR texts of 350,000 materials, enabling full text search and n-gram analysis. Okay. To use text data more effectively, just transcribing may not be enough, but they are better to be annotated in some way. For example, if various types of entities such as persons, places, events, or even the weather are annotated, these data can be used, for example, for biography, social network analysis, historical GIS, or even paleoclimatology. Ogihan Nikki database, which contains all the diaries written in the local government of Edo period, achieved such annotation by the combination of crowdsourcing and AI technologies. The other example is SAT database, which contains very huge collection of Buddhism texts and annotated it with TI XML format. TI is a de facto standard for the representation of text in digital form. With TI, SAT database annotated various information related to the text and especially the philological feature of it. Also, linking text to the other format of materials, for example, the image, is important because it will contribute to the multimedia representation and analysis of historical data. The other types of non-literal sources are equally important in historical big data project. Especially image collection is the topic we pay much attention to. My institution invented a new tool for image collecting process called IIF Curation Viewer. This system assists people to collect small pieces of image according to specific theme that he is interested in. For example, Kaokore is a collection of facial expressions collected from different sources by using IIF Curation Viewer. It can be said that with this system, people can motivate themselves to collect a wide range of images based on their own interest, making and sharing their own collection of historical images. Also, Edo Tourism Guide is a good example of this of this that the curator collected the images related to the touristic sites of Edo period. And for the photos, there's an interesting system called memory graph, also developed by my institution. This system was designed for collecting photos of historical places. When people try to take a photo of some specific place, the old picture of that exact place will be overlapped, and they can take photos from the same angle as that of old photos. If this system will be widely used, citizens can participate in the photo collecting activities, and the photos taken at historic places will be accumulated in greater number and contribute to the construction of memories related to the place. Okay. Other than images and the photos, 3D data has recently been produced quite rapidly. There are already a certain number of 3D collections run by local governments, museums, or academic institutions. One example of this is Stoneworks 3D Archive, which is collecting the 3D models of stoneworks existing anywhere in Japan by using photogrammetry. Photogrammetry is a method of creating 3D model from photos. As it is relatively cheap and easy to use, this technology will become more popular for those interested in cultural things in the near future. Some people indeed already share their private collection in individual sketch file repositories. Some 3D modeling has done, and putting annotation on the sketch file is also the case. It is clear that the technical barrier for 3D data creation is getting lower and lower, as we can easily do that with iPhone today. And more people, whether it's academic project or private activities, will participate in the 3D digitization of cultural heritages. Okay. So all of these activities, tools, and systems significantly contribute to the construction of historical big data. Then, how historical big data can be utilized? Of course, first of all, statistical analysis and application of deep learning or machine learning algorithm to historical data, such as text mining, network analysis, or automatic image recognition, will be further promoted. But in addition to such quantitative approaches, however, I would say the improvement of new digital research platforms are equally important for historical practice. For example, Edomi, this one on the top, Edomi is a large-scale comprehensive knowledge base for Edo period in terms of its politics, culture, economics, or education, and which is based on Edo big data. Also, ambitious attempts for developing 3D or 4D research platform have been proposed both in the West and Japan. A wide range of knowledge, to say historical big data, will be integrated in such space and provide a platform for new way of historical analysis, representation, and communication. These are the example of 3D research environment called Pure 3D Discovery Editions. Well, this one is Urban History 4D. There is a 3D space there, and there are some 3D models representing a building in the city, and there are some photos here. So they are integrating each other, and you can search the historical information from this interface. So how we can answer to the question of during history with historical big data, or even in broader sense during history and digital era? I think we can probably say in historical practice with big data, historians no longer dominate the knowledge and skills. Why? Because thanks to technological advancement, non-experts can participate in producing historical data. For example, the Kuzushiji reading with OCR, or access to materials at home. And also, historians need help from the experts of other fields, such as informatics or computer science, when they analyze the data, and from citizens to collect big data. So unless depending on the wide public, it is impossible to create and utilize historical big data, we say. I think this is why digital transformation of historical practice will inevitably and deeply connect with public history. So this is kind of like a conclusion of my presentation, but I think there are some further discussions about this kind of topic. So the first thing is that in many cases, it seems that citizen participants remain to be only a data collector, or the computer scientists are regarded as only a code writer. So this may be a problem. How to create a space where historians, computer scientists, and citizens participate together in the creation of historical knowledge. To do that, I think the reciprocal communication between historians and other stakeholders are necessary, and historians may play a role as a facilitator for that activities. But this is only my impression and my opinion. So what the role of historians, we have to pose this question very seriously during historical practice in the digital era. And this is the question that posed Carvin, the facilitator today. Thomas Carvin has posed in his book in the introduction. Or we also have to ask, should we create such a space that the historians and other stakeholders will participate in the historical practice in an equal position, maybe it's not appropriate to say equal, but is there any difference between historians and the other stakeholders for the role that they have in these activities, or they really work together in these activities? So this is the question that we have to think about, I think. And there's another question about the digital public history, I think, which is a recognition and awareness of biases induced by digital. For this problem, the concept that proposed mostly in Europe, which is digital hermeneutics, which means taking digital methods and the tools themselves as object of interpretation. I think this is a good image of this concept of digital hermeneutics. So we have to criticized the algorithm itself, or digital source, or tool, or interface. All of these kind of digital methods should be interpreted as an object of historical studies. And last question, I don't have any answer for this question, and this is a very open question. But what is the particularity of public history or digital public history in Japan? Or is there any particularity of public history in Japan? So this is the last question. This is my last question, and I will finish my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jun. I enjoy them all. Particularly, I'm amazed by the 3D technology, which I've never really come across. I should check it out a little bit more. But I also believe that this field of digital public history is very important important globally, particularly in the current societies, like the post-COVID time period, since many historical sources have been kind of digitized. So thank you very much again. Okay, now I'd love to ask for some comments and questions from Thomas. So, hi, Thomas.
Hello, Amy. Can you hear me well? Okay, right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much to the Explorers and to Rimiat to invite me to comment I have a lot of comments. I took a lot of notes. This is a great event. I'm gonna try to be short. The first thing is that this whole discussion is very much answering the question between West and East, right? Your Japanese scholars, you use a different methodology concept from a different part of the world. This is, exactly what, we meant by international public history. I think this is a very, and I'm not saying that because you're here, but I think it's a very good presentation and a very good discussion. I'm really impressed. And I think that says a lot about international public histories. We may have different understanding, different approaches of public history, but I think we can discuss about the key questions that the three presenters have expressed in their conclusions. I think it's a wonderful event that gave me a lot to think about. So I'm gonna try to organize my thought into some key points. The first thing is, one thing that I was struck by in Japan was the importance of what we could call academic public history, right? Public history being developed also, but also defined by academics, so history professors, which is good, but which also asks the questions of who can tell what public history is and who is doing public history. And I think in your discussion, in the examples that you show, it's really clear that public history can be done, yes, in university, but can also be done beyond the university. And I think the three examples or the three presentations were very clear in that. And I think it's a very fascinating point, because we need to diversify public history. And we have the tendency to mostly focus on academic public history. And I'm a university historian, so I'm part of that. But I think it's important to talk to archivists, to museum curators, to computer scientists, as the last presentation mentioned. I think it is a very important point. And I think something in common for the three presentations is also the fact that we need to broaden the public in public history, right? And the first presentation was about why text and why not visual. And I think the discipline of history was built upon writing and text, which is not a problem in itself. But the societies evolve, right? And we can see that it's maybe less and less written and more visual, right? I think historians and public history practitioners need to adapt. If you want to enlarge your public, you need to enlarge your medium, right? So text is not enough, right? There's nothing against writing, but it cannot be the only medium. History discipline was built upon historians writing for historians. This is no longer the case. I mean, it's not for me, right? I'm also writing, producing films, or designing for different publics. And I think for that, we need different mediums. So I really appreciate the first presentation about comics. And I have a PhD researcher who's doing pretty much the same thing. So I'd love to to put you in touch. She's also doing a comic about her research. And I think you share very much the same questions. It was fascinating. I think there's also a question about, well, you mentioned anachronism in comics and fiction, and I think there is a lot for historians to learn from other disciplines. And that's something that the three of you mentioned. Historians need to read more about other disciplines, right? And I do think that historians are often late in those debates, right? We need to talk more to literary scientists about fiction, right? How to build fiction for history and not to oppose fiction. I think we have a lot to discuss into this. And the concept of anachronism, which is like a curse usually in history, should not. I mean, there are different types of anachronism. If you produce a TV documentary you have about, let's say, the Middle Ages, you have somehow to use anachronism, right? Or if you produce a film about antiquity, you have to use anachronism. I have no problem with that as long as it's clear what is anachronism for you in your production. So I think we need to talk more to other disciplines. and not only to historians. There are also a great discussion in the last presentation about shared authority, also in the second presentation about shared authority. I think shared authority has been used in public history a lot to say, well, we need to share, historians need to share. But as the second presentation showed, it's not only that. It's about, sometimes editors, publics, groups, they don't want to share authority with historians. So it's not simply historians to share, it's about people sometimes don't want to share with us. And I think that ask historians and train historians to also think about how to work with, right? How to work with editors and how to basically explain your point and explain why doing history matters and how doing history could fit. Comics could fit a TV series, a TV show. I think we need to be better to show our partners why history matters and how history could sell. Right? Because some people, marketing officers, editors, they're also interested in entertaining and making money, right? And I think we need to think about how good history could sell, right? And there is something there about this. And it made me think about a discussion on Twitter last week about why pseudo archaeology sells more than real archaeology, right? So basically, why an archaeology about aliens and plot attracts more audience than good archaeology. And I think there is something about us, archaeologists and historians, to adapt our work, adapt how we talk about our work to different audience. And there are rules about, brevity, engaging the public, perhaps using the mystery that some other people do and that historians usually do not use in their work, like, to spark interest into the audience. So I think we need to do a better work at communicating history, archaeology to people who are not interested in facts or are not interested in this very dry and positivist type of history. The last presentation also, I loved it as well, and I love that project. It's fascinating. And the question of what does the digital bring to public history is a very important question. You mentioned different concepts. There's access to history, access to digitized archives, space. When you do digital public history, you talk to different audience who maybe, as we can see today on that screen, in Japan, in Korea, in Europe, in Latin America. So the digital forced us to rethink about space and your audience. And this is something, but it's also about shared authority, as you mentioned in the last presentation. About what is the role of historian, right? If, for example, you can find everything on Wikipedia, why do we need historians? And that's a valid question for students, but for all of us. What is the benefit of doing a history training when you can find anything online, right? It is a valid question, and there is a need for historians, obviously, but I think it asks the question about what can historians bring to public participation, right? And I agree with the last presenter when he said that we need to think about historians creating framework of participation, not correcting people, not telling people, well, this is true, this is not true. I mean, it's part of it, but it's beyond that. I think we need skills to design framework that can be collaborative, as you mentioned in the documents, and also to make sure that participants get something. Because in participation, it's not only participant working for you, right? Because that's very ethically wrong. I think they need to get something. In this Japanese project, for example, there are tutorials for participants to learn the 19th century language, right? A training. So it's a give. And again, history needs to look beyond history. Citizen science is a wonderful type of methodology that can be somehow applied to history. So historians need to see about what citizen science can bring to public history, which is actually the topic of my project and my team, the division of task, right? Not everybody can be an historian. but you may have different tasks for people to participate to history. The last presentation mentioned a very good question. In digital public history, most of the citizens simply collect, right? That's good. But can citizens take part in the interpretation of history, which is way more difficult? And I think they can, right? But we need to build framework in which citizens can take part in public history. And I wouldn't say that we need equal expertise, because we're not equal, and that's fine, right? We're not equal, but we bring different expertise, right? And this is very important. Easterns have an expertise, but we also need other types of expertise, right? We need people, for example, who have lived through the event. We call it historical witness. We may need people who have specific skills in designing a podcast. We may need people who have expertise in interviewing people, journalists, right? So it's not equal, and I'm not looking for equality in public history. I'm looking for combined expertise, right? Working with different people with different expertise, citizens and other, and together we can make history richer. I'm not looking for equality of expertise, because that would be that couldn't work. But combined expertise is something wonderful. And I will stop there, because I think it's better to involve the public into the discussion. But I think this is a great event also for the future questions. Where is public history now, and why is it good to do international public history? And comparing, discussing different approaches of public history, not giving one definition of public history. That's not the point, but discussing common topic. What is the role of historians? How can we communicate better history? I think this is what international history is good for. So again, thank you for your invitation. I'm looking forward for the public discussions afterwards.
Thank you for the amazing presentations and the comment by Thomas. We actually, in our original plan here, I will ask some questions to the presenters, but since there are already some questions in the chat, I will just read them and ask the audience first. And at last, I will ask my question. It's a very general question, considering the situation of Japan in the global discussion of public history. So the first question in the chat is already answered. It's by Kresno Bramantio. It's about the Japanese graphic novel Vagabond by Takehiko Inoue, depicting Japanese samurai Miyamoto Musashi. The question is how you compare the original product, a novel by Eiji Yoshikawa, with the graphic novel. What is your comment regarding the application of historical facts in graphic novels? Do you think Vagabond is a public history product? Thank you. And Takuya has already answered it. Would you like to read your answer yourself?
Oh, it's okay. So my answer is okay. So my answer is, I think the question is very important. It's difficult to think about this, the case of comics based on the historical novels, but it's very difficult to compare. So when we think about the originality, the comics based on the historical novels, that because there are two levels of translation that occurred. So from history to the fiction to the comics, as far as the Vagabond is concerned. And as far as Vagabond is concerned, I think this is similar to the case of Elusive Samurai. The author, in a way, is already a commercially successful writer with Slam Dunk or as works. It is based on the hero Miyamoto Musashi, but focused on his vulnerability rather than its strengths in the representation level. But in the when we focus on the practice or consuming level, that is a bit different between the Vagabond and so Elusive Samurai. That is because Japanese, as I mentioned in my report, the plurality of consumer communities, what produced that plurality, media or generation, interest, And I believe there are many factors, but one that I think it's important is gender. Japanese manga magazine are basically gendered in the form of shoujo manga magazine. That is the manga magazine for girls, and shonen manga magazine, manga magazine for boys, and seinen manga magazine, the manga magazines for adults. There is the very different types of manga magazines, and it has been pointed out that women often read shonen-oriented manga magazines, so manga magazine for boys as well, while men read relatively less shoujo manga magazine, the manga magazine for girls. I still don't understand how this different gender balance arises, but the difference is in purchasing demographics has a significant impact on commercial strategies on the part of publishers. Yes.
I can't answer the question on a sociological level, but as a woman, yes, I read both manga for boys and girls and young adults, whatever. And I think, for example, in the shonen manga magazine that is manga for boys, there is exciting adventure and also interesting characters, both men and women. And in the magazines for women, there is more about love and also relationships between young men and women. And I think there is also interesting shift of female characters in all these years of Japanese manga. If we look at the manga scene 50 years ago, it was quite different. And maybe we can discuss this in another event, but now I would like to read the next question from Sebastian from Colombia. How do you think digital history can enrich the production, circulation, and reception of historical comics? This is making a bridge between the two topics of the day. Is any presenter ready to answer?
Maybe I should say something. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
So yeah, this question is really great, and I don't have any concrete answer or clear answer for that. But okay, I want to take one example of Japanese project that's called that's run by the Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto, which is the database for the subculture of Japan. So it contains the manga or games or the other subcultural products. So this kind of database is already constructed in Japan, and then they are thinking about how they organize the information about those kind of products. So of course, who is the author of that comic or novels, or when it was published, or where it was published, and how many they're issued. Also, these kind of all the metadata they stored in the database, and it's already became open to the public. So maybe this is, I'm not really sure this answer well the question of Sebastian, but maybe the digital will contribute to document those kind of subcultural products. Then maybe it is useful for the study of the public history about the manga or comics that like Tokuhara-san, Takuya is just doing. So maybe he's gonna use this kind of database for his research, and that will help his scholarly activities. So yeah, this is the one, and this is the thing that I just came up with, but yeah, I'm not really sure that I answered the question very well. So sorry for that.
Okay, and I wanted to add it. So the sales data shows the paper sales of Weekly Shonen Jump have fallen by hundreds of thousands of copies over the last decade, but this has been compensated for by the digital versions a bit.
And does Yoko have any idea on this question, maybe?
Yes, and I think the development of the digital history is very contribute to the, especially the production of the historical comics, because among the case I cited today, the work featuring the Dreyfus affair I referenced today, and it is also said that for during his production, they very manipulated the digital database over the time, and he always reads the many archives, and he got inspired by its content, and so, and I'm sorry, but I know only the case of the French database, but especially some archivists say that recently the many creators, including also the bande dessinée or other painter or some kind of the author of the art discipline uses the digital database for making their works. So to the question of the Sebastian, I want to say yes, and digital history and its database very beginning to inspire the creator, and I don't have any concrete data now, but maybe for the audiences, it is also be the digital history can be great contribution, because not only the author but also the reader can search positively the resources cited in their historical comics by themselves using the digital databases. So I hope the digital history can be the digital history will provoke more movement of the historical comics in future.
Thank you
Can I
for the
just
answer.
say one thing?
Yeah, Jun, yeah, please.
Okay, thank you. In addition to the database, and as Calvin has concluded that like developing open and free access, I think with listening to the first presentation of Yoko, she said like a graphical feature of the narrative is a very important concept in the public history. And I think this kind of graphic feature of the historical narrative in the comics and the 3D representation of historical phenomena is really familiar, because in the 3D representation, it is impossible to know everything about the reconstruction about the historical object or the event, because simply we don't have any thoughts for that. So we, to some extent, we imagine the part of that kind of object or the event, and then we constructed it in a 3D format. So maybe there's some point that we share to think about this problem of like fiction and imagination and reconstruction. in the historical studies or the public history?
Yes, thank you for your answer. And I have already seen this point in some questions. Now let's go over the question list. The next one is from Ted. If public histories involve certain kind of radical transformation in terms of the side of speaking, that is, who has the right to authentic voices in historical narratives, as cultural studies radically transform the discipline of literary studies, which I do believe is the case. Would any of the panelists like to address the question as to what kind of change is brought about on the part of a historian's consciousness as being a historian when she or he deals with non-conventional materials such as bande dessinée, mangas, films, novels, and digitalized contents? Does a change in historical sources from a written or recorded material to a popularly available material inevitably encourage a historian to change his or her manner of doing histories, or it is simply expanding the fields of historical investigation by excavating unfamiliar and locally restricted historical narratives? Without addressing this complex question around the authority and agency of a historian, I feel it would lead to another appropriation by academic histories, particularly in places like Japan, as Thomas rightly pointed out, where authorities of academic historians are somewhat sacred, as they have an infinite appetite for anything new, however popular, esoteric, or banal they might be. So generally, do the new sources, new media, such as manga or digital content, change the way of doing history for you as historians? To all the panelists. And if I may add, it's not a question, but it's a comment, just as Jun said, when you are using these publicly accessible, popular content with a lot of fiction, how can you deal with the problem of fact and fiction in these sources? Is that the same with written sources, or it's different?
Sorry, it's not the answer to the question and just my personal sentiment, but the question that Ted posed is very, how can I say, the important one for me, because that is the what I'm really hesitant now. And yeah, and before I tried to think about the problem of the public history, and especially the case of the bande dessinée, I think I will maybe I will be historian if I do my research and write the articles or academic books. But after I got interested in this kind of the media, yeah, at least for me, the definition of historian looks very ambiguous one, and and personally, it's now for me difficult to define what and who is a historian and what defines the historian, and so, and I know it's not the answer to the question, but maybe if the more and more historian gets interested in the another type of media, the definition of historian might be changed in future. And also, I want to ask you, all of you, what do you think of this difficult problem? Yeah.
Yes, that is very difficult question to answer, but for me, it's not a general answer. It's my answer. So to tell the truth, my sentiment is not changed as a historian. That is because I guess the problem of the generation. So I studied and learned history at the university in the age of after the linguistic turn already. So many historians experienced actual experiment as actual experiment. He experienced linguistic term or epistemological term, but I learned in the textbook, in the authority, as an authority of linguistic term or any other any other using of variety of medium. So my background is the American history, especially in the social history and African American history. So I when I was undergraduate school, I usually use some types of oral history or visual or comics, but yes, the fictional is they're very problematic. Yes, I agree. But as a sentiment, I naturally and unchanged. Yes, for me.
Thank you for the answers. There is an ongoing discussion between Ted and Hamish and Thomas in the chat. I will not read every comment because the time is running out, but I would like to summarize it that historians should not only stay in the ivory tower, but should also be humble and engage in the democratic discussion as negotiators of historical knowledge. As what I have seen in Germany, this is actually quite common. It's also a common and career choice of historians to go into the civil society and facilitate projects between civil society and historical academia. Then we have the next question from Antoine. This is already answered in the chat, but still I would like to read it. Antoine is a French public history student and also a young researcher planning a thesis about Greek antiquity reception in Japanese pop culture. He was wondering how was developed classical Greek studies in Japan, both in university and public space. Does Japanese people know about Greek history? Are mangas about Greek mythology successful? There is an answer by Takuya, and I would also like to ask Jun about this because you are a historian of classical antiquity, although about Rome, but I think maybe you know more about this area in Japan.
Okay, thank you for the question, Antoine. Yes, yeah, I'm a historian of ancient history of Rome, but yeah, for the ancient Greek history, I think your question is a bit too broad for me. How the sorry, so I was wondering how the developed classical Greek studies in Japan, both in university and public spaces. So the classical Greek studies in the university. How should I answer for this question? It's really do I tell the history of it? It's so yeah, the one point is that of course the classical Greek study in the university is academic activities, so it depends on the source materials, and it's very yeah, it is very academic activities, so it's a bit different from the public activities about the Greek mythology stuff. I know that Takuya is more familiar with that probably, but there are many many examples of using Greek mythology for the subcultural products, right? In the novel, like novel or the RPG fantasies or the comics or something like that. So I think there are a bit clear distinction between the academical study in the university and the other activities in the public, I think. And in the university, this is my personal impression that one problem is that for a long time, the many Greek historians focus on the Athens, the city of Athens, and just only focus on the Athens. So we have a lot of knowledge about the ancient Athens, how the democracy in that city was developed and how that collapsed in the 4th and 3rd century BC. But now scholars start focusing on the other cities, and their sight will just broaden to the other cities. So there, of course, the material is so small in other cities, so it's difficult to do a research on that kind of cities other than Athens. But they just start focusing on this kind of topics. So I believe that there will be produced much more knowledge about the ancient Greek and the future and the universities. And on the other hand, for the public space, I don't know much about the activities there. So maybe Takuya will explain in detail. But the example that I know is like, the Sato Futaba-san. She is she write a comic. She published a comic about the ancient Greek history or ancient Greek culture stuff. Well, she was the professional of Greek literature because she studied that in the university, and she got a master on that topic. And after that, she started writing comics about that. So I think she's a good example or a good case study for the public history in this field of classical Greek studies. Yeah, sorry that I my answer is kind of like a messed up. Sorry for that. But how do you think? What do you think about it, Takuya?
No, my answer. Thank you, Jun. And my answer is the same to the TED in the comments. So, I'm a teacher in a high school. So every student's bored the textual text, the Greek history in the textbook. That is source of democracy, blah blah. That is very critical comment. But as Jun-san said, and Ted said, so whereas popular Greek histories from novel to animes are very wonderfully interesting and illuminating, that is very good comments, and I definitely agree with Ted. Thank you.
But I think that the focus on the Greek, classical Greek, in the public field will affect the activities in the university, because the scholars will be motivated in that kind of, so, they're searching for the new thing in the academic research. So maybe those kind of reciprocal influence will exist between the academic and the public.
Yeah.
And I also like to mention to Antoine that Okamoto Michihiro wrote a response to you, and he said that Japanese students that has plenty of knowledge on Japanese manga, and there is also the contact of him. So if you are interested, you can write to this Japanese scholar. Also, I mentioned a project from Belgium, which is also about video games featuring Greek mythology. We are almost running out of time. Now, I would like to ask the final question, which I prepared and which I think we also mentioned in the discussion before. How can we situate Japan in the public discussion of global public history or international public history? Jun already asked, what is the peculiarity of public history in Japan? And I would like to give 2 comments to give you some orientations in your answers. First, Japan is still not very visible in the international discussion of public history, comparing to Europe and America. And second, so in some sense, we can say Japan is marginalized in the global discussion. But from another perspective, Japan is also marginalizing some parts of its own histories and in relation to its neighbors. For example, there is little public discourse of war crimes and colonial history of Japan in the political field especially. And this is to the protest of many neighboring countries like China and Korea, especially. So in the sense of decolonization, there is still a lot to do in Japan, but it's not very visible in the international discussion. I would like to open this question to the 3 presenters and also to Emmy, because you also come from Japan. How can you situate Japan in the global discussion of public history?
Hi, thank you, Shuyan. Yes, I agree that Japan is kind of in this twofold situation in the discussion of decolonizing the curriculum, well, through public history. And to be honest, well, I will work on this project with actually Thomas, aiming at like presenting something in April. So I would like to share my thoughts probably after that. But my current ideas on it is just Japanese kind of attitudes towards these colonial history is like super political issue. So it's kind of like ideology. It kind of shows your ideology, like political thought. So it is really controversial. And that's why I think it's really important issue to talk about it in public history field, but also it could be super controversial. So I'm still figure out how to deal with this issue. But yeah, that's just my current thoughts on it. But yeah, I'd like to ask the answers from presenters today. Yeah.
Okay, so at first I talked about the 3 big difficult questions. The first, what we position in the Japanese public history in the world narrative. So that is a very big question, but I am a student, but also a high school teacher. So I spoke from the educational perspective. So that is an important point to Thomas mentioned already that in Japan's case, that is introducing ing, so public history. So in the field of high school education, the term of public history seems to have spread mainly this year or last 2 years. So relatively new terms or concepts in the school educations. So especially among teachers in the field, especially among teachers who use SNS or internet, I think this is due to special features of public history in magazines such as the Rekishi Hyoron, as well as increasing the number of university historians actively promoting public history. This is because researchers who are favorable to public history are also willing to attend research forums such as those connecting high school and universities. The difficulty, on the other hand, is that for many high school teachers, public history appears to be largely dislinked between two understandings, two opposite understandings. One is the understanding is a public history is something of a new authority or new discipline with a defined domain, just as it always have been in historiography. On the other hand, other understanding is a public history is anything goes. So this leads me to my problematic point, which is that I personally believe that Bhikkhu public history cannot move forward with only one wheel. So we need two wheels. So it is also important to examine each historical practice closely and to aim for better historical practice, a public good history. This is, of course, requires professional historical skills, but it also includes the task of selecting public good history. At the same time, it is also strengthen our authority at the same time. Also, they actually rightly drawing the boundaries of public history community by continually creates an outside of it. So at the same time, I think it is important to keep asking a question who is the public as the first answer. And second, so Shunyan's most important question, I think, and very difficult question, that is very hard question for me, especially about the last two questions. The marginalized Japanese public history is marginalized and marginalizing others. Yeah, so in my report, I rejected the dichotomous idea of good and bad publics. However, if someone said, then revisionist historical discourse still needs to be taken into account, I would say no. That again, I believe that analysis of representation and analysis of acts of practice in the public history and act of separating good public history from bad public history, and the refusal to separate the two and to look within them are not antithetical, but complementary. I believe that they are complementary. What I'm interested in how people receive or emerge in history as a high school teacher, I often encounter students who sadly in fact have a view of history that oppressive to others or marginalizing the victims. It is easy to say from the position of authority as a teacher, the power as a teacher, that history is wrong, but they do not easily take the teacher's word for it. That is why I want to understand the dynamics of their daily life, focusing on the action aspect of how they come into contact with and consume historical information and accept their historical view. We want to focus on what lies between the good and bad, not because it is anything goes, but because we are aiming for public good. Yes, thank you.
And sorry, and it is just my personal impression, and also it's only the case of the comics, and at least for me, I feel that there are bits of the, how can I say, the very different situation from the between the case of the Japan and the case of the France I introduced today, because although the Japan has a more really wider audiences and wider number of the products, when it comes to the problem of the public history, the distance between the historian and the author more wider than the case of the France, and it is a problem which I have to do more research, but at least now it seems that for example, the in the Japan, the product and the audience is so diversified, and so it's very difficult to how can I say, make the bridge between the academic research and the public audiences, and also the how can I say, the problem with the public history is maybe it just beginning to develop in the Japanese comic society. So it seems to need more time to see the more the development of the public history, and the public the comic future in the public history in Japan. So for me, in the situation of Japan is just under development, at least in the comic sphere. So, and maybe, but it depends on the what we focus on when we say the public history. And so I don't know it can be the answer for the question, but this is my opinion.
Okay, just before we finish, I just want to take some time to thank everybody who was here today. I want to thank Amy and Shuyang for helping put this together. And I also want to thank the presenters, Jun, Takuya, Yoko, and also Thomas for his generous comments for your presentations, who were awesome. And I also want to thank Hamish. I'll also thank you on behalf of the Explorers of the Federation. And I hope we can see each other again. If you have any final comments, I think this will be just a moment to do them before we close.
No, I think did Jun, did you want to answer the final question put by Shuyang?
Yeah, I'll give just very short comments from the perspective of digital thing. So in my opinion, the public history is about raise the question about the objectivity of historical studies. So what the objectivity in the historical practice is a very important topic in the public history. And in that point, I come up with some scholars who are proposing the memory activism movement, which is about the historical memory about the past, right? So I think memory, the word memory, the concept of memory and public history was really tied each other and very connected to each other. And in that perspective, some digital archives are dealing with that kind of problem. For example, the Hiroshima archive, or there's an archive, digital archive called Hiroshima archive, or the Okinawa battle archive. These archives collecting the testimonies of the survivors of this kind of Hiroshima nuclear weapon explosion, or the battle of Okinawa. So I think maybe the digital will contribute to this kind of memory. I'm not really sure whether it's appropriate or not, but digital will contribute this kind of memory activism movement in some way. And this also has a big impact on the activities of public history. Yeah, so sorry, I'm just thinking about it. So this is not an answer, but that's what I'm thinking right now. And yes, that's my comment. Thank you.
Well, I thank you so much, guys. All three of you guys had like such specific background experience that I think added so much to like the bigger questions that we ended up on. And Emmy and Shuyang, thank you so much for your moderation. And Thomas, I'm not sure if Thomas is still around, but Thank you to everybody who made this event possible. It was absolutely fantastic. And thank you for, thank you for sticking around where we went over time, if you did stick around.